for those who walked on eggshells around a parent who could not regulate their emotions. You very much are living an environment that's completely dominated by stress, and you're constantly trying to figure out what your caregiver is going to do, and that takes precedence over your own feelings and thoughts. Welcome to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, the podcast where we debunk the eat less, move more, shrink more mentality and focus on what really matters, which includes your relationship with your body, food, self-worth, and the behaviors that align with all of those. I'm your host, Christina Hathaway, licensed therapist with specialized training in food and body obsession, certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. At the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, we believe what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. So let's have a conversation about that. Before we get into today's episode, I want to make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, if you don't want to miss any content that's being dropped, make sure you hit that notification bell as well. I also want to know who are the people you want to hear from on this show and what topics would you like me to continue to cover. Thank you so much for your continued support. Now, let's get into the episode. What is up, team? Welcome back to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast. I am so excited that you took this time out for yourself to learn something about your physical and mental health. So, raise the roof. We love that for you. If you don't know what that means, just put your hands up high to the sky. We are back to the basics still, and today we're talking about something that I get so many requests for, and it is about emotional regulation. How we learned it, how we lose it, and how we rebuild it. As a girly that has struggled with her emotions most of my life, I love this conversation because I personally have done my own work on how I got to the place that I was. I've been very candid about my healing journey, and I was using things like control of other people, alcohol, exercise as a way to manage my emotions. And it didn't work, by the way. I was very lonely at the time. And as a therapist, of course, I had my own self-reflection, but then I do my own work. I see my own therapist. And I recognized I did not have the skills. I did not even know how to regulate. And for a lot of the women that I work with, they don't understand that either. One of the first reflections that we do is what is my relationship with my emotions? And how did we get here? Because many of us were never taught to regulate our emotions. I had mentioned this earlier on in this series of we come from generations of individuals that weren't keen on talking about emotions, teaching emotional regulation. Now, that's not for everyone. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, my mom taught me her parents didn't have a good relationship with emotions. So my mom taught me that what did they say? All emotions are valid. But then it was just okay, they're all valid. And there wasn't this in-between place. So it went from one extreme to the other. And being able to have those emotions, but then also manage those emotions are important. And yes, they are all valid. When we're younger, we were taught to manage them, but more in a way of how to best avoid them. And I hope you guys can agree to that. There were probably certain emotions that were okay and certain ones that were not. I know for me in my household, my sadness was oftentimes met with a anxious laugh. Not like a big laugh, like a weird giggle. And it pissed me the fuck off. It pissed me off. So what happens? My sadness turns to what? Anger. And anger was an emotion that was acceptable in my household. We didn't have the books. We didn't have the podcast. We didn't have any of this. We did not have any of this. So we learned from the people around us. So let's talk about that in early life. Sit in, take some notes. Let's do this. So when you think about your life with your family, I want you to ask yourself this one very simple question. Were emotions allowed in your household? And like I said, certain emotions were allowed in my household, at least to have expression with. And I don't remember, I do remember this. I do remember when ET went home, I would cry so hard as a child. I mean, like, it was so sad. And I do remember, like, being sad and my parents kind of laughing at me. And I didn't want them to laugh. I remember being like 5 or 6. I wanted them to give me a hug, and they did hug me, but it was funny to them. But think about that. Like, I'm so sad. Like, E.T. went home. What the fuck? Give me a hug. And they'd hug me. I'm not saying they were like, get away from me, but it was just, they were laughing at me. And it was funny, but again, the perception of the child is sadness is not okay. Again, if you're looking at parents who only demonstrate anger, I said this, that my client said the other day, her dad said, you hurt my one emotion, which is anger, right? In some people's homes, and in the reflections that I have, I wrote down a few things. Some of the clients wrote down that in their household, their emotions were minimized. They were told that, not to be too sensitive, or you are just too sensitive. That's not that big of a deal. Just get over it. And emotions to them were something wrong, right? Like, I'm just too sensitive and I need to not express my emotions. And or emotions were really overwhelming or felt unsafe, because I know for me, when anger came about, that was a perfect opportunity to get my butt kicked. And I would endure that and then move on with my life, right? It can be scary when your parents are expressing anger, especially if you come from a household. Like, I have a few clients who come from households with addictive parents, and it was fucking scary for them. Or it put them in a position to not feel even the fear, because they had to go run and get their siblings and bring them in a room so that everyone could be safe. So now I'm not even feeling the fear. I'm just completely avoiding it. For those who walked on eggshells around a parent who could not regulate their emotions, you very much are living in an environment that's completely dominated by stress. And you're constantly trying to figure out what your caregiver is going to do. And that takes precedence over your own feelings and thoughts. And in some homes, I wrote this down, emotions were simply inconvenient. There wasn't time for them. There wasn't space for them. There was no curiosity. And when I talked about the family dynamics a couple of episodes ago, this is not being seen nor heard. So what do you do? What do we do, as we've really been talking about these past few episodes? Wow. You adapt, baby. Because what do children do? They're very adaptive and they're very resilient. They're fucking awesome. Kids are cool as shit if you understand them, right? So how do we adapt? Well, when emotions aren't welcomed, you learn to manage them, right? You learn to manage them internally by pushing them down, and you will intellectualize them. You'll be able to turn them into something more acceptable in your household, maybe something like productivity, achievement, compliance, control in some way. So think about those parts we talked about, right? See how it's all coming together? It's like I wrote this to be something that builds on each other. Wow. So when we don't have the ability to internally regulate our emotions, which is where it should happen, because, that's how we can calm ourselves down. But when that wasn't modeled to us, regulation becomes something that is external. Okay. So let's talk about what that looks like. Obviously, a big one is food, emotional eating. Sometimes I don't think people break that word down. Emotional eating. What does that even mean? Well, you're having an emotion, and in an effort to avoid that emotion, you eat, or eating is the only sense of relief that you've learned that you can achieve whenever you're having certain emotions, right? So it's an avoidance and or a reprieve from that. But I think people are like, I'm just an emotional eater. What is that? Why? What emotions make you eat? Because it's not all emotions, right? It's like when people say I'm addicted to sugar. I'm like, all sugar? If I put a fucking bag of sugar in front of you, you're going to eat the whole thing? No. What is it? What are the emotions that cause you to eat? Movement, as I talked about in the last episode, talked about my client Rachel, and that was the one thing she could control in her life. Some people will dive into work. They will be workaholics because maybe the only emotion that they really resonate with is stress and chaos, and that is comfortable for them. So diving into work helps them not deal with the fact that them and their spouse are having issues and they're feeling sad, or they're feeling loneliness, or they're feeling disappointment or guilt or shame in their life. They can just focus on work. Work makes me feel good. I don't have to feel anything else. Perfectionism is another way, because if I am seen as perfect and receiving those accolades, and I'm, as I always say, like something that I struggle with myself, like I can do it better than everyone else. It gives me this grandiose sense of self. And if I'm perfect and getting accolades and I'm the best, I don't have to feel anything else. But that's not reality. People were like, yeah, I like that. I want to do it. That's not your reality. Your emotions are supposed to be felt. They're there for a reason, right? Other ways are controlling others, as something I said. Controlling other people to say, you're the problem. You made me feel this way. If you would just, then I wouldn't. That is control. That's manipulation. That's saying, I don't want to feel this emotion, so actually I'm going to project it onto you so that you feel bad. And I'm not going to take accountability for how I feel, because if I do, then I'm going to have to learn how to manage it. And I don't know how to do that. So here, you have it. I wrote a whole book on that. Numbing, I did it through alcohol. You guys, my alcohol consumption was terrible. Now listen, I took time off of drinking. I really like my relationship with alcohol. Now, I will say, after my dad died, I did overdo it a couple of times. And I was like, I fucking hate this. Because it makes it just that like anxiety. And I was numbing. But luckily for me, I realized it because I had done the work in the past. But in the past, it was terrible. Terrible. I was in an abusive relationship. I was just miserable. And instead of feeling those emotions and, like having a way to manage and regulate them, I drank and I yelled at my very shitty boyfriend. And then lastly, it's similar to work, just busyness. I hear a lot of women have so much guilt over over sitting and resting. And I tell them, is it really rest, or is it you being with yourself, being with your thoughts, being with your emotions? Because more times than not, that's exactly what it is. You never sat with yourself. You always were busy, because if you could just keep your mind off of it, then you didn't have to expose yourself to it. I think of this when my clients say, yeah, I didn't even think about food all day because I was so busy. Similar, right? You're not, when you're busy and you're focused on everything outside of yourself, you're not focused on yourself. What is up, fam? I am jumping on to talk about a few changes that you're going to see here at the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast. We are going to be coming down to one recorded episode per week. And we're introducing one live stream event per week. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you are following me at Mindset of Matter Coaching on Instagram. This is where I will make announcements if we're going live on YouTube or if we're going live on Instagram. We're going to kind of play with the different channels to see which one gets the best response. This allows for me to talk with you rather than at you. Get to ask your questions, hear your comments, all of the things. I want to build this as a community, not just me on the back of a microphone. So those are going to be the changes that you will experience starting February 2026. And I hope to see you guys on the live stream events. Now, back to our show. So even hunger is something that you don't experience. And I want you guys to recognize, like, none of these things are bad. These were all solutions to the greater problem, which is you did not have the capacity to self-regulate. It was never taught to you. And these are very creative solutions that you've created, and they worked for you at a certain point. But now we need to learn how to do them differently. Emotional regulation is a developmental skill. And if it wasn't supported early on in your life, as we're talking about, It wasn't that you failed to learn it. It was you were never given the conditions to learn it. I hear so many women say, like, I should know this by now. Like, I should be over this by now. But how? What, magic? You read one self-help book, you're a guru? No. This takes practice. It's something you develop over time. I mean, listen, guys, even this morning, I had very small margins of time for the things that I wanted to do. And my husband asked me a question. And I said, no. I said, get her number out of my phone. Because he wanted me to like set up something with someone. And I was like, just get her number out of my phone and you ask her yourself. And he didn't hear me right. And he's like, I'll just Instagram her. And I'm like, get the number. I screamed, get the number out of my phone. And he was like, oh, I didn't hear you correctly. And I was like, So I had to go back and be like, I'm sorry. I really overwhelmed this morning. I have a lot of things to do and very small margins for error. And I was able to regulate. So just wanted to share that. I want to talk about, though, Gabor Maté. Dr. Gabor Maté, my man. I love him. He talks about a lot of the connection with emotional suppression and how it affects the body. One of his core ideas is that emotions are consistently disallowed or not allowed, and the body becomes a place that they live instead. So they don't go, just because you avoid them doesn't mean they just go away magically. They don't. He explains that the body will express what the mind has learned not to feel, not as punishment, not as weakness, but as a communication from your body. In his work, he points out that chronic stress, autoimmune conditions, digestive issues, and burnout are often linked not to acute trauma, but to long-term emotional suppression, especially suppression of anger, grief, and unmet needs. The body keeps the score because it's very honest. It's very honest. And for a lot of women who are super high achieving, high functioning, they are the ones who are always fine. Fine is not an emotion until their body says otherwise. Things like not being able to think clearly, trouble with sleep, trouble with being able to perform. As I talked about last episode, your lab work. I think perimenopause is very interesting because it exposes our blind spots. And this is one of them because your neurotransmitters are affected by the decrease of estrogen and progesterone, you're already going to feel a bit more emotional. And if you don't have that wrapped up, it's going to be really overwhelming. And for coming back to Gabor Maté and the body, I want you to think about when you are emotional. Like, where do you feel it? Like, for me, it's really tight in my chest. Anxiety lives in my chest. And I know when I'm not taking care of myself because I wake up feeling that way. You could have tension in your jaw. I have some clients that deal with TMJ, and it's really trauma and emotional avoidance. You can have fatigue live in your bones. You can just feel so heavy. You can have cravings, right, for emotions that you don't have a language for, but you're like, I want this thing. And your body adapts, and it will adapt until it reaches its limit. And these types of bodily expression that you experience is communication that, hey, we're tired of you not expressing the thing that we need you to get out. Okay. So how do we begin listening to our emotions, right? Especially if we've never taught to listen to our emotions. The first step is checking in with yourself. One of the first things I do with most clients is set a check-in time. They will set a reminder. Actually, I set the reminder in the app and they tick it off. And really, they just spend time to go inward. What am I feeling physically? Is that physical feeling connected with an emotion? And where are my thoughts going? Just taking the time to go inward without judgment, we're just observing, will help you to start to listen and open that dialogue, right? Then as we're beginning to understand, okay, well, when I'm feeling sadness, I feel a pit in my belly. When I'm feeling anxiety, I feel tightness in my chest. When I'm feeling anger, I get really hot and my shoulders tighten. Now we have these bodily cues and the emotions that we're experiencing, and we can use those as a direction on how to express ourselves. Because as I talked about before, emotions all have, did I talk about it here? Maybe I didn't. Your emotions are all ways to communicate something. Like anger is, I don't like that. I don't like what's happening and it's making me angry, right? Anxiety is fear-based. Sadness is a loss of something. So they're all ways of communicating, and being able to express those emotions in ways that communicate. I lost something. I'm sad about that. I'm fearful about something. That is how we let them out, right? And one thing I want to say though too, and I just had this conversation with the client, is the difference between your true emotions versus carried emotions. So this is also something I want you guys to understand as you are setting these timers and checking in with yourself. With your real emotions are something that really work through your body very quickly. They're roughly around 90 seconds. And you have this wave where your emotion comes up, it has a crescendo, and then it comes down. And it's very transient, and you can just let it move through your body. Whereas carried emotions are emotions we're internalizing from other people. And carried emotions are not easy for us to let go of because they aren't actually ours. We're just internalizing them. And that's the distinction. Your own emotion is something that goes up and then comes back down, whereas a carried emotion festers. And the difference between managing the first versus the second is the first we just breathe our way through. The second, we have to have an internal boundary that says, this isn't mine. I give this back to you. I no longer carry this shame. That's a big one. Carrying shame of people who hurt us. I'm angry actually at you. I will not carry your shame anymore. And that, when I teach clients that, they're like, you know what? I just realized most of the feelings I feel all day are someone else's. Yikes, right? So if your reaction feels bigger in the moment and faster than like what you're thinking, or also it feels very familiar to you, meaning that you're experiencing this often around certain people, that also can be a carried emotion. And it's really important to know the difference between the two. So again, listening to emotions doesn't necessarily mean like also indulging in them. When I'm telling people to listen to their emotions, I don't say, please go play a sad playlist. I've been doing this myself. When I get sad, I want to listen to certain songs from my dad. And yes, I do it too. But don't do that. Just allow it to come and go. I always say, don't hold on to it, but don't push it away. Don't ask yourself, how can I get rid of this, right? Ask yourself, what is this telling me? Talk about the self being curious. And as I had just mentioned, the emotions are there to acknowledge and understand what's going on and then proceed forward. When we outsource safety, right? Emotional safety, we don't have the capacity to regulate. We think we're regulating, but we're not going through the full process of emotional regulation. Internal relationship begins when we stop doing that. Again, when we pause instead of trying to distract ourselves, we stay present in that emotion versus override it. And we allow them to move through our bodies. We're not correcting. We're not pushing away. We're not holding on to it. Just sitting in it. And again, your brain might think, I'm going to be sitting in that forever. No, we're not distressed indefinitely. We're just sitting and trusting that, I say this all the time, that our emotions are transient and they're allowed. They are allowed. And remembering that what stays stuck or what we avoid stays suppressed, and it's suppressed in our body. And over time, regulation will be less about this control of the emotion and more just about like humanness. And the more that you expose yourself to your own emotions, I feel like the greater capacity you have for your emotions. Like, like this isn't going to last that long. So you actually open yourself up to experiencing the full range of your emotions. You build tolerance with that discomfort, similarly to what we talked about in exercise. You also develop a language for what you're feeling inside and that internal stress. And you get to respond instead of react. And as we talked about in the subconscious mind, your avoiding emotions is probably going to be the thing that your body wants to come back to because it feels safe. But as we become aware and we have that internal dialogue to be able to communicate with what we're feeling, we become present and we become inner conscious mind. So emotional regulation isn't about being calm all of the time. It's about being connected to yourself, connected enough to notice something's off, connected enough to stay in that offness, and connected enough to respond with a choice rather than your subconscious habit, right? So if this wasn't modeled with you early on, you're okay. You're not behind. We can learn it now. We can learn it consciously. And that will give you such a greater experience of life because emotions are pretty freaking cool. I mean, I have experienced some of the hardest emotions. I think grief is the hardest emotion to experience. However, I'm okay. I survived and am still surviving. It doesn't go away. But also, I'll tell you guys something. When you can just let that happen, it makes joy that much better because you feel the depths of grief and it sucks, but it gives you an appreciation for joy or content, just feeling content. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. If you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. Just tick that little share, copy link, send it to your text group or share it from Spotify or YouTube. And if you love it, make sure that you have followed this podcast wherever you're listening to it or subscribe to our YouTube channel, as my goal is to get one of those little plaques from YouTube in 2026. You giving me a 5-star rating and review will also help that situation. So please, please, please take that 1 to 2 minutes. I'd love for you to do that. Other than that, if emotional regulation and how you treat your body, and this Back to the Basics series is really resonating with you, we have coaches who are ready to work with you, who are here to hold your hand and walk you through our process where we see your mind, your emotions, your body, your identity as one integrated system. And we use one program, one coach to help you work through that. So check out the show notes for our Clarity Call link, and I am going to let you be on your way today, reminding you that what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. Bye-bye.